I first noticed how quiet her footsteps had become, like rain softening against windows after a long night storm. She lived across the hall and moved through her days as if carrying a heavy bowl of water she dared not spill. She was 28, a teacher who used to leave in a rush of color, scarf bright, eyes bright, voice bright. After the breakup, brightness turned into careful gray. Her mail piled up for days before she gathered it. The eucalyptus plant by her door drooped and waited for a kindness she could no longer remember to give. Grief has a weight that hides inside ordinary objects. The ceramic mug becomes a boulder. The door handle becomes a mountain ledge. Even the mirror asks questions she cannot face. I have learned these truths the slow way, through years and losses of my own. And when I looked at her, I recognized the posture of someone bracing against an invisible wind. She crossed the courtyard with her shoulders tilted forward, as if the storm still lived inside her and did not trust the sky to stay clear. On certain mornings, I would see her pause at the staircase and stare at the empty space beside her, the place where a hand once waited. That pause is where the heart tells on itself. It is the small ache that does not need words. She taught children to read, and yet her own days had become sentences, missing their verbs. She went to work, returned, and sat by the window as dusk gathered like a slow hush. The city moved around her, horns and laughter and the far hum of trains, but nothing seemed to stick to her edges. There is a kind of silence that is not peace. It is a blanket left out in winter, stiff with frost. She wrapped herself in it anyway because it was the only thing that felt honest. When she smiled at the neighbors, the smile was polite and thin, the way a paper lantern holds a tired flame. I could sense her bargaining with time. If I stay still, maybe the pain will pass. If I do nothing, maybe the world will remember how to carry me. Yet in the midst of all this, small signs lived like shy birds. She kept her classroom bag by the door, ready. She watered the eucalyptus on a Sunday afternoon and pinched away its brown tips. She wrote something in a notebook, closed it, and placed her palm on the cover, as if feeling for a pulse. These were not victories anyone would cheer. They were pebbles in a pocket to keep her from floating away. I watched and waited, not to rescue her, but to notice with her how even after a storm the ground, though muddy, is still ground. She often came home while the sun still rested low, shadows spilling across the hallway like spilled ink. One evening, as she struggled with her keys, I stepped forward and asked if she would like some tea. She hesitated, the way someone does when they have forgotten how to accept kindness, but then nodded. Her eyes carried the hesitation of a bird, unsure if the branch could hold its weight. In my living room, the walls were dressed with canvases and finished skies, storms breaking over mountains, flowers that seemed to lean into silence. She looked around quietly, her hand brushing across a frame. I told her I was once a painter, though now I painted more for memory than for galleries. She asked if storms were difficult to capture. I said no, storms are the easiest. It is the calm that's hardest, because calm demands trust in light. That night, we spoke little. She cupped the tea between her hands, as if the warmth might teach her skin something it had forgotten. Before she left, I placed a small canvas in her hands, painted with a single butterfly wing, only half finished. I told her storms may break branches, but sometimes they reveal wings. She did not reply, only traced the painted edge with her fingertip, before holding it close to her chest. Days passed, and I noticed a difference. She began pausing at my door, asking me questions about painting, about colors, about why I chose to keep unfinished works. I told her that an unfinished canvas still breathes possibility. She listened, eyes lowered, but her shoulders began to loosen, her silence less like frost and more like soil waiting for rain. One afternoon, she admitted that her classroom had felt heavier, that children's laughter now reminded her of what she had lost. I told her grief is not a thief, it is a stern teacher. It forces us to discover what we carry beneath the rubble. She frowned, perhaps unsure whether to believe me, but she did not turn away. That was enough. We began small rituals. Some evenings, I left my door ajar, a sign she could join if she wished. She sometimes brought her notebook, sometimes only her silence. I showed her how a brush could move across the canvas without certainty, how the hand learns to trust movement before the mind agrees. She painted awkward lines, trembling as though the storm still lived in her wrist, but she stayed. That staying was her quiet rebellion against the weight that had almost pinned her still. I watched as the storm inside her began to soften. Not gone, never gone, but shifting, reshaping, teaching her that broken skies still give way to dawn. Winter melted slowly into spring, and with it, something in her began to change. Her steps no longer carried the same heavy paws. She still walked carefully, but her posture lifted, as though she had finally allowed the storm to settle behind her instead of within her. When she came over one evening, she carried her notebook and, with a timid laugh, asked if I would read a page. Her words trembled with honesty. She wrote of silence like a locked door, of nights where she pressed her hand to the emptiness beside her. But then, like a sudden clearing in the sky, her lines shifted. She wrote of how storms bend trees, but do not erase their roots. She described herself as a broken branch, still reaching for the sun. I looked at her, and for the first time in months, her eyes did not flinch from being seen. That week, she returned to the small canvas I had given her. The half-finished butterfly wing had been waiting, patient, suspended between what was and what could be. With hesitant strokes, she filled the other side. Her colors were uneven, her brushstrokes unsure, yet the butterfly spread wide, no longer halved, no longer trapped in pores. When she held it up to the light, her lips curved into something unfamiliar, yet familiar, an unguarded smile. I told her that a storm does not erase who we are. It reveals what we must become to keep moving. She set the brush down, her shoulders easing as if she finally believed she was more than her grief. It was not a loud transformation. There were no grand speeches or sudden flights of joy. It was quieter, like watching a seedling push through cracked soil. Slow, patient, inevitable. She began to live differently. She greeted her students with steadier warmth, no longer afraid of their laughter. She called her mother more often, letting words travel across the distance she once feared to bridge. And on weekends, she painted not perfectly, not always joyfully, but consistently. Each brushstroke seemed to whisper, "I am still here." One evening, as the sun poured gold through her window, she placed the butterfly painting on her sill. The storm had left its mark, yes, but it had also carved space for wings. She was not the same woman who once stood at the staircase, staring into emptiness. She was altered, softened yet stronger, as if the storm had broken her, only to give her back to herself. She had become the butterfly that emerged after the storm, not untouched, but forever changed, and in that change, she found her freedom. May this story remind you to trust your own seasons of change. If it touched you, share it with someone who may need its light. And if you'd like to walk with us through more stories of resilience and transformation, remember to like, comment, and subscribe. Together, we can find the wings waiting within every storm.